So here's what happened back then. The last remaining soldiers of the planet were giving their best to fight the demons who came straight up from hell. At this point, only a handful of the mortals are left against the indestructible demons. To be honest, they are all still alive because of only one guy. Well, the healer. He is just an ordinary guy, but with exceptional healing abilities. There is no injury or disease he cannot cure or repair. Lost an arm? No big deal, he can grow it back like a branch on a tree. Body covered in bruises and cuts, you'll be cured within moments. With such a talent, you'd think he is the hero of the planet. But you couldn't be more wrong. He was literally stabbed by his superior for doing his job diligently. The superior, the bravest warrior of all, was tired of fighting these endless wars against deathless monsters, so every time he thought this was it for him, Will arrived to heal him again, and again, and again. So he couldn't take being hurt so many times and tried to kill Will so everyone could die in peace. Will, who didn't even take a moment to rest his eyes from countless days, couldn't believe that the soldiers were giving up. He even came to the front lines to avoid any delays. Only to hear that these people didn't want to continue fighting. The soldiers walked out on the healers who are defenseless, saying they are done. Even before they had the chance to exit, the demonic dragon attacked them with a fireball, and everyone was crushed under the rubble of broken concrete. Will was the only one who survived the attack. But in those moments, he also understood what these soldiers were up against. Before dying, he at least understood that he was simply watching from the sidelines while these people fought this impossible situation. He regretted his whole life for spending it on learning something like healing magic. It all felt meaningless. He couldn't take this pain and regret, so he picked up a small rock and charged at the dragon, but of course, his ridiculous attempt to fight a mighty dragon with a mere stone led him to his demise. Not so surprisingly, his wish in the last moments before dying came true, and he woke up 5 years in the past. One look at the envelope on his desk, and he knew what day it was. He dressed up quickly and hurried out of his apartment, and his suspicion was true. Without any delay, he decided to make the most of it and rewrite his fate in a completely different way. His plan of enrolling in the Academy for Offensive Magic has many barriers. Most importantly, healers can't use attack magic. But Will decided to shatter that preconceived notion, despite knowing that he had to climb over countless walls. He retained his past memories for sure, so that's something to start with. So now his goal is to make use of this knowledge and learn to fight with his own 2 hands, ultimately saving the world. The first step to do that is to get into the world's best school for learning attack magic, Schwartz Academy. It is said that its elite education system can turn anyone into a top-tier battle mage. Which reminded him of the most talented battle mage from his past life, who was also a graduate from this school. But the problem is that he is a healing mage, so getting into Schwartz Academy wouldn't be that straightforward. He wished he had also retained the fortune he earned in his previous life, and all his problems would be solved. He even thought about using his healer abilities to earn some cash, but he couldn't make it before the enrollment deadline. As he was raking his brain for a way into the academy, his sister's appearance shut everything out, and his eyes started welling with tears. Right. He is in the past now, where his sister is still alive. One look at him, and she started laughing, asking if his stomach hurt or something to make him cry like that. He brushed it off, saying there was some dust in his eyes, and looked at her with warmth. Seeing her sister again made him more determined towards his goal. He can now save all the people whom he couldn't save back then. And that's when it clicked. He held his sister's hand and thanked her with excitement, claiming he had figured out something, and left home immediately. Before we see where he hurried off to, let's get to know a bit about this Magic Alliance. It is an organization that binds together all magic academies in the kingdom. The delegates of this organization are the ones behind every decision regarding magical education. At this point in time, the chairman of the alliance was also serving as the headmaster of Schwartz Academy. However, he was a bit MIA for a period of time. Later, everyone got to know the reason behind that. It was his sick granddaughter, who was plagued by an incurable disease. And this old man's name is Alnalam Golgran. Every day was a new kind of disappointment when it came to her. There was no healer who was able to do anything about her sickness. But it seemed like they were lucky today. Will, who is from the future, also brought with him the advanced healing spells that were not available at this time period. And he decided to use it to save the first life. He suddenly landed on the windowsill of Marie's bedroom and asked the chairman if he could handle the situation. He didn't even need any introduction as the chairman recognized him immediately. Given his reputation, Gran never expected him to be a person to sneak in through the window. Will blushed, knowing that was true. His past self would have never done that, but coming back from death sure made him bold. He went straight to the point and said he could cure her. Gran asked what his angle was in doing such a favor. Will desperately said that they can talk about that later, as the disease has progressed faster than he thought. Gran was also ready to do anything to save his granddaughter, so he gave the permission to proceed. Although he didn't lower his intense stare as Will tried to treat her. He didn't look away even for a second. Will shook it off and tried to concentrate on his spell. As soon as he started the healing, he realized that his mana capacity had dropped compared to his previous life. But what matters is that he still remembers the formulas. After a few agonizing moments, the girl slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she noticed was the prince who saved her from a life-or-death situation. She got flustered and rolled over to the other side. Her gran, who was worried sick, looked at her and asked how she was feeling. She gave him a warm smile and said she didn't know the last time she felt so light. It was strange to see the most feared person in the whole Magic Academy be so soft to someone. But obviously a granddaughter is a whole other situation. After a while, Gran and Will settled in the living room for some late-night tea. Gran thanked Will and told him to name his price. Will started off saying it is not that big of a request, but since his healing magic is top tier, he claimed he has nothing else to learn in that field. So he said he wished to enroll in Schwartz Academy for a change. Gran didn't much object to the idea but simply asked if Will thought this through properly. Upon confirmation, Gran said he'll handle it, and that his enrollment will be approved. Phew, what went more smoothly than Will expected. On the other hand, a sketchy teacher in the Schwartz Academy reviewed Will's enrollment profile. He smiled wickedly at the chairman's actions of accepting a healing mage into a combat academy. Eventually, the day of the entrance ceremony arrived. It is not said to be the world's best school for just any reason. This boarding school had everything imaginable to produce the world's best mages. It is an academy with a unique curriculum, it has vast grounds, numerous training fields, research facilities, and is fully equipped with a massive library. They also have influential alumni outside the school and receive various forms of support from the kingdom. The unique part of this year is that there is a healer among them. Will knew he had so many hardships to cross before he got to his goal, and was so confident in changing the future. But all that confidence disappeared when he couldn't even hit a dummy with basic combat magic. The sketchy teacher from earlier even went to the lengths of banning him from taking classes and reading books in the library, as a punishment. Will demanded him to teach something before testing him, but the teacher said it was a waste of time to teach offensive magic to a healer, and dismissed him. Before he could say anything, a douchebag of a student struck Will with a fireball. As the douchebag, with a weird name like Ulps, started making fun of him, and instead of stopping the bullying, the teacher joined him in laughing at Will. Later that night, Will sat on a bench behind the academy, sighing to himself. Apparently he spent his whole day trying to conjure some offensive magic and hit a dummy. But that led to nothing. At least he didn't expect it to be easy. He knew for a fact that the healing magic and offensive magic have completely different power sources. Mages take mana, the power of the spirit, and convert it using spell formulas to cast magic. Whether mana is static or dynamic, it depends on the caster's nature. Using dynamic mana to create fire or explosions is what defines offensive magic. Since healers only possess static mana, they can't use offensive magic. But he had hopes on the academy since it is known to raise top-tier battle mages from almost nothing. If he only had a way to learn how to forge dynamic mana, he was confident that he could manipulate his mana. Despite expecting the worst situations, he never thought of being banned from taking classes right from day one. But it was too soon to give up. He vividly remembered the words of a person from his past life who started off with very low mana, but ended up being one of the most talented battle mages. As he conspired with different plans to gain the knowledge he wanted, for example, by sneaking into the library, or such, some called him out for being in the school grounds this late into the night. He instinctively apologized to the person, but when he registered who it was, his tongue got tied for a moment. "Veronica, ma'am?" he said silently. Veronica and Will fought on the same battlefield in his past life. She is the mysterious person from his past, a first-rate battle mage. And in her final moments she said something to him, but we don't know what yet. To meet her again in this life felt nostalgic. His glance went to the sword which she was unsheathing, and he noted that it could slice anything in an instant. and the very sword was now aimed at Will's neck. She is nothing like the sketchy teacher. Veronica is on a whole other level compared to most of the mages. If she decided to kill him, there is nothing that can stop her. So he was careful with what he said next. She cooled down a bit after knowing that Will is just a student trying to practice by himself. He looked at her politely and asked if her name was Ms. Veronica. She said yes, but condemned his way of addressing a teacher. He looked at her in shock, as they both are not that far apart in age, so how can she be a teacher? He didn't have to ask. His expression gave away what he thought, so Veronica explained to him that she skipped a few grades and became a teacher immediately, starting this year. Putting all that aside, this is the only chance for him to learn offensive magic from her. He straightforwardly asked how to sign up for her classes. Disappointingly, she told him that she didn't have a class of her own yet. Since she had skipped so many grades, she had barely attended normal classes herself. This year, she would only be working as an assistant instructor, assigned to answer students' questions. As she was close in age to the students, the management believed they would feel more comfortable approaching her. However, for some reason, no one had come to her with anything so far. Will, however, wasn't disappointed at all. Instead, he felt pleased, seeing this as an opportunity to take private lessons from her. He asked if it was okay, as he had something he wanted to discuss. She told him to go ahead, it was her job, after all. He asked, "If a healer wants to learn offensive magic, what do you think they should do?" Her eyes widened at the question, and she immediately understood why his mana flow felt off. After a brief pause, she said, "I see, you're that new student everyone's been talking about." He tried to hide it, but she had already figured it out. She continued, explaining that although it was rare, the academy had a method to forge dynamic mana from almost nothing. Will grew excited, thinking he might be able to use it. However, there was a catch. Even if she taught him, it would be impossible for him to use offensive magic. Because he already possessed an overwhelming amount of static mana, any dynamic mana he created would simply dissolve into it. Even if he somehow managed to sustain it, the two would interfere with each other, preventing offensive spell formulas from functioning. In short, there was no way for a healer to learn offensive magic. All his plans seemed to collapse at once. Still, he wasn't ready to give up. If necessary, he would invent a way, but he was determined to learn it. Will thanked her and was about to leave when she stopped him, saying she wasn't finished yet. While there might be no way for him to create dynamic mana, there was still a way for healers to become battle mages. As an example, she said swords are used to cut enemies down. A chair, on the other hand, is made of wood for the purpose of sitting. But if you swing it and smash it into someone, it can knock them out just fine. Will found himself briefly distracted by the strength hidden in her slender arms. Anyway, she continued, explaining that people simply don't think of using a wooden chair as a weapon because it was made for a different purpose. She then demonstrated with her hand. With it, she could gently touch him, or hurt him. That flick she gave as an example was brutal enough to prove her point. So the lesson is, she concluded, anything can become a weapon depending on how you use it. She also pointed out that he was already an irregular simply by enrolling in an attack magic academy. In reality, his mana wasn't that of a pure healer. Will looked down at his hands, wondering if that was because he had regressed. She raised her sword and pointed it at him, warning him to stay conscious of, and embrace, the aggressive fury within himself. If he did, she said, he would surely crush his enemies. The next day, as all the students gathered on the grounds again, Will couldn't help but wonder why Veronica was so open to a healer learning offensive magic. His thoughts were cut short when the sketchy teacher called out to him, "The healer!" They had stopped using his name altogether. She announced that he would be participating in the one-on-one mock battles since there was an odd number of students. The fact that he couldn't use offensive magic, she added, was his problem. With a careless smile, she said she didn't care if he got beaten to a pulp, and casually mentioned that she had already decided the matchups. Will was paired with Ulps. He sighed at the obvious setup. Ulp's omen came from a well-known noble family and was always surrounded by lackeys. From what Will had observed in class, he wasn't just riding on his family's name, he was actually a competent battle mage. Ulp started laughing, asking if Will was going to cry to his mother after being defeated. The old Will might have ignored it, but now, it genuinely irritated him. Still, Will wanted to test Veronica's advice from the previous day. But before that, he decided to even the score with his teacher. When the teacher stated that forfeiting wouldn't be accepted, Will calmly replied that he had no intention of forfeiting, he simply had a proposal. If I lose this match, he said, I'll quit Schwartz. The teacher immediately smiled and accepted the deal without hesitation. But if I win, Will continued, I want to attend regular classes. The teacher tried to interrupt, but Ulps began mocking Will again, distracting her. In the end, she dismissed it as a pointless discussion of an impossible outcome, and ordered them to begin. Ulps immediately manifested a barrage of knives out of thin air, his specialty, knife creation magic. He launched them at Will while sneering that a pathetic healer, like him, could never defend himself. Surprisingly, Will remained completely calm. The moment he activated his technique, his movements sharpened, he matched the speed of the daggers and dodged them with ease. The truth was, his magic's essence lay in life manipulation. When he healed others, he enhanced their life activity, maximizing their natural recovery. But that same principle could be applied offensively. Ulps froze for a moment in shock as Will evaded everything effortlessly. Then, gritting his teeth, he summoned even more knives and fired them at full speed. Will made the same hand sign as before, but this time, his aura began to surge around him. It allowed him to intercept the entire barrage at once. And then, he caught one of the daggers with his bare hand. With a faint smile, he looked at Ulps. I'll be borrowing one of your daggers. His classmates couldn't believe what had just happened. They had always assumed he could only use healing magic. In reality, Will was still using healing magic, just in an offensive way. But these stuck-up idiots would never understand the flexibility of their own powers. All they knew was the rigid, restricted knowledge they had been taught. So, confused by what they had witnessed, they simply concluded that Will must be using offensive magic. Ulps conjured more knives. Honestly, his power was just boring. What kind of fight was this, standing in one place, summoning knives, and throwing them? By now, he was clearly fueled by embarrassment. He hadn't managed to land a single hit on someone who didn't even follow the conventional rules of offensive magic. Will, using the small dagger he had borrowed, shattered every incoming knife once again, without a single scratch on himself. Just when it seemed Ulps's magic couldn't get any more pathetic, he summoned a much larger blade, as sheer numbers had failed him. Could you even call it a knife? Or a dagger? It looked more like a candy-stuffed piñata. And honestly, he should be careful swinging something like that so close to himself. As if that wasn't enough, he added rotation to it. Will had made better-looking paper rockets back in school. Even with all that effort, Will stopped it effortlessly, with just the tip of his small dagger. Then, slightly increasing his physical enhancement, Will charged toward Ulps, intending to teach him a proper lesson. Being a healer, he figured he could always patch him up later, so he moved forward with lethal intent. But just as he closed the distance, a wall of mud rose between them, halting him mid-attack. Their teacher had intervened, claiming they were running out of time for the remaining matches. But both of them knew the truth. He simply didn't want to be humiliated for his misplaced confidence. Will didn't mind, as long as he was allowed to attend regular classes. He left the grounds feeling deeply satisfied and silently dedicated his victory to Veronica. Behind him, Ulps insisted it had all been a fluke. He even warned the teacher that his father didn't need to hear every detail. The teacher agreed, adding that they couldn't allow a mere healer to act so high and mighty on their grounds. The next class was also conducted by the same teacher. Since the initial lessons were fairly basic, it was common for a homeroom teacher to handle multiple subjects for a while. Today's lesson was on magical tool creation. They were tasked with making an ice bomb. Once the materials were distributed, the students were instructed to assemble them according to the manual, while infusing mana. Although these were offensive magic tools, the nature of the mana didn't matter much here. Most of the functionality came from the materials themselves, so Will was, for now, at no disadvantage. Inside his kit, he found a fragment of an ice golem and powdered flame tree bark. Holding the ice golem fragment between his fingers, Will carefully read the instructions. Suddenly, the piece reacted in his hand. Without hesitation, Will enhanced his physical strength and hurled it as far away as possible. The moment it landed in the far corner, a massive crystalline structure of ice erupted upward. It was, honestly, an impressive demonstration, almost like a prop made for the lesson itself. But instead of appreciating it, the teacher scolded him for disrupting the class and deducted points from his grade. The classroom filled with quiet snickers. Finally, it was time for the next lesson, magical creatures. A small, rather cute salamander sat inside a cage on the teacher's desk. The teacher deliberately made Will sit in the front row, citing his poor grades and instructing him to pay close attention. But it was painfully obvious that teaching him wasn't the intention. Placing him so close to the salamander made that clear. Suddenly, the tiny creature launched what looked like a blast of fire straight at him. Instinctively, Will pulled out a pan from nowhere and raised it to shield himself. But nothing happened. There was no fire. It had all been in his head. Interesting. The teacher, however, was annoyed by what he saw as pointless antics and confiscated the pan immediately. That was when it finally clicked for Will. They would allow him to sit in class because of the bet, but they had no intention of actually letting him learn anything. He let out a quiet sigh and looked up, wondering how he was supposed to deal with this situation. All the while, a girl in his class watched him, her eyes filled with quiet pity. The harassment continued for a long time, from teachers and students alike. They constantly obstructed him, making it nearly impossible for him to learn. The instructor would ask him questions without ever teaching the subject. It wasn't just the school grounds, even the dorms offered him no peace. People found excuses to deny him meals and threw trash outside his room. Exhausted by it all, Will lay on his bed, his stomach empty and his mind burdened with countless problems. The only thing holding him together was the memory of how he had defeated Alps in their previous match. He reminded himself that he had to rise above this petty bullying, focus on his goals, and become a battle mage. Ignoring his hunger, he pulled out the textbook he had finally managed to get that day and forced himself to study. The next day, only 2 students were present in the classroom, and the teacher was nowhere to be seen. Will suspected that the class had been relocated without informing them. He stood up and approached the girl sitting nearby, unintentionally startling her. He simply wanted to confirm whether the class had been moved overnight. The girl hesitated but admitted that she had been wondering the same. She added that she, too, was on the list of students their teacher seemed to dislike. Sensing her loneliness, Will extended his hand and offered friendship. She accepted, introducing herself as Erica Glenn, Will's first friend in this accursed school. Her remark about him being excluded because he was a healer made Will realize how deeply rooted the discrimination was. In his past life, he had earned the title of Best Healer, without effort. He had never experienced anything like this. But here, along with everything else, he had to fight prejudice as well. Erica suddenly asked why he had come to Schwartz. Will replied that being born a healer wasn't a valid excuse to avoid fighting. She looked confused, and he gave an awkward smile, saying he had his reasons before asking about her. Hesitantly, Erica explained that she came from a small noble family in the countryside. With no brothers to carry on the family name, she had been pushed to become a battle mage so she could one day lead the house herself. But lacking talent for offensive magic, she struggled to make friends, and classes had become painful for her. Now that she had befriended Will, she seemed genuinely happy. But that happiness didn't come from finding a friend, it came from finding someone worse off than herself, someone who eased her guilt. Will pointed out that she was saying rather harsh things with a smile, but she didn't seem to mind. She even encouraged him to ask her for help whenever he didn't understand something. Will thanked her, but added that things wouldn't turn out the way she expected. When she asked what he meant, Will simply opened the door and stepped out to find where their actual class was being held. After quite a walk, they finally located their class. The teacher refused to let them in, accusing them of being late, despite having deliberately misled them. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he came up with something even more cruel. He asked Will to solve a problem on the board, despite the fact that Will hadn't attended a single class on the subject. "If you solve it, I'll overlook your tardiness," he said. "If not, I'll deduct even more points." Ulp smirked, convinced that Will would soon be forced to drop out under such pressure. Will calmly picked up the chalk and began writing on the board. When he finished, he turned to face the teacher with a faint smile. The teacher stared at the solution in stunned silence. It was completely correct. Left with no choice, he allowed Will to enter the class. After class, Erica was waiting eagerly for his answer. She asked how he had managed to solve that problem. Will casually replied that it was just a matter of applying a formula from their textbook. She was so shocked that she slammed her desk, demanding to know if he had studied that complex textbook on his own. He had only started reading it the previous day, but Schwartz's textbook was polished to perfection. It systematically covered everything, from the basics to advanced applications, without any unnecessary fluff, encompassing a vast range of knowledge. Simply reading it was enough to surpass the level of an average battle mage. The only issue was that, without magical aptitude, understanding the book would be extremely difficult. Fortunately, Will had always been strong in theory in his past life. Erica, still stunned, asked how he managed to read such a difficult textbook without a teacher's guidance. Her voice began to tremble, and she even started tearing up. Her belief that she was at least a step ahead of Will was beginning to crumble. But Will reassured her. He told her she would be fine and promised to teach her whatever he understood, now that they were friends. Her eyes lit up instantly, and she couldn't thank him enough. However, that wasn't all. Will had his own plans to achieve his goal. So, he asked Erica for something in return, because not every class was theoretical. She pointed out that he had already defeated Ulps in a practical class, but Will shook his head. That alone wasn't enough. He explained his plan. Even offensive magic was divided into two categories: general magic and unique magic. General offensive magic consisted of established formulas that had been analyzed and structured so that anyone could use them. Mastering it required learning and applying these formulas. Unique offensive magic, on the other hand, was different. Its formulas were developed internally by the user, and could only be used by that specific individual. Schwartz's curriculum had separate classes for both. With his talent, Will could handle unique offensive magic classes smoothly. But it was the general magic classes that posed the problem. He couldn't pass them without mastering the basic offensive spells. The teacher warned him that even if he had managed to excel in theory, the practicals wouldn't be so easy. He was then asked to take the same test as on the first day. Hit the target using a basic offensive spell, a fireball. If you can't, the teacher said coldly, you can say goodbye to your dreams. The teacher had already begun to suspect Will's trick, using healing magic offensively during the mock battle. But this was different. This wasn't something Will could fake or hide. He was certain that Will couldn't use general offensive magic and was eager to drive such a useless incompetent out of his class. But just as Will stepped forward for the test, the teacher caught a glimpse of something unexpected. Will was smiling. In the very next moment, a fireball ignited in Will's hand. The teacher was left stunned. Will's smile widened, knowing the teacher hadn't noticed his trick. What Will had actually done was simple, but clever. He had asked Erica to create a fireball beforehand and stored it inside a salamander's tail. He concealed the tail in his hand, slowly healing it with his magic to prevent it from burning out completely. Erica had been worried about his hand burning, but Will assured her he would be fine as long as he continued healing himself. That was the advantage of being the world's greatest healer. Now, standing on the training grounds, he used his healing magic to fully activate the stored energy in the tail, making it appear as though he had conjured a fireball himself. He launched it at the target, and, with a hint of mockery, asked how he had done. The teacher chose not to respond. Instead, he decided to deal with Will later and dismissed him for now, stating that he had passed. Later, Ulps met the teacher in private and demanded to know what was going on with Will. The teacher, deep in thought, admitted that he would like to know the same. How had Will suddenly started using offensive magic? Ulps went so far as to threaten him. If he reported this to his father, he could have the entire class dismantled. He spoke to the teacher as if he were nothing more than a subordinate, and instructed him to use whatever means necessary to drive Will out of the institute. The teacher, who, frustratingly, still hadn't had his name mentioned, found himself in a difficult position. He couldn't allow a mere 15-year-old healer to ruin his life. Which meant only one thing. It was time to deal with Will personally. The instructor called Will to meet him on the training grounds after school. Since Will had missed many classes, Will suppressed the urge to say, "And whose fault is that?" The teacher claimed he needed to attend supplementary lessons. What a convenient excuse to beat up a student. Will calmly replied that he had already caught up with the material with the help of a classmate, so there shouldn't be any issue. But the teacher, clearly hiding an ulterior motive, dismissed that argument. He said it wasn't Will's place to decide, and conveniently added that he would be the one determining the content of these supplementary lessons. Naturally, he chose a mock battle. A teacher versus a student. He was truly willing to go to any lengths to protect his position. Still, he pretended to be generous. Considering the vast difference in their abilities, he offered Will a handicap. If Will could land even a single hit on him, he would pass. Will thought about it for a moment, and accepted the so-called supplementary lesson. The teacher immediately entered battle mode, an eerie smile creeping across his face as he cast a spell on the ground. Will instantly recognized the technique, manipulating the terrain to upheave the earth, and stepped back at just the right moment. But it didn't end there. A thick pillar of mud shot up directly toward his face. If he hadn't ducked in time, his face would have been unrecognizable. Without giving him a moment to breathe, another wall of earth erupted beneath his feet. Will leaped back again. The instructor smirked. Is running away all you can do? Will quickly analyzed the situation. The instructor's magic wasn't creation, it was manipulation of the existing terrain. That made his attacks significantly faster than conventional spells. But not impossible to dodge. Will moved through each attack with precision, slipping past them like a trained fighter. Then, suddenly, the instructor slammed two massive blocks of mud together in an attempt to crush him. But Will reacted faster. He leaped over the collision point and struck downward, attacking with the dagger he had borrowed from Ulps during their previous match. Of course, the instructor shielded himself with a dense layer of mud. Will immediately jumped back, anticipating a counterattack, but instead, the teacher began speaking. You'll never break through my grand form absolute with that level of power, he declared. Will gave him a sideways glance. The name alone was painfully pretentious. The teacher continued mocking him. Using healing magic to attack is nothing more than a cheap imitation. Will let out a quiet sigh. Then he spoke. Through healing magic, he explained, he had gained a deep understanding of the human body. He had learned that humans live their lives subconsciously holding back their true strength, because the body cannot withstand its full power. If pushed beyond its limits, the body would simply break. The instructor scoffed, asking if Will had resorted to lecturing because he couldn't defeat him. But Will continued regardless. Even if those natural limiters were removed to unleash greater strength, the body wouldn't survive unscathed. But he was a healer. So it didn't matter if his arm broke. Will gathered all his power into his right arm and began walking forward, slow, deliberate steps. For a brief moment, fear flickered across the instructor's face, though he tried to mask it with hollow bravado. Will spoke calmly. Let's test it. Let's see if my punch can break your grand form absolute. In the next instant, Will surged forward, his power roaring, a fierce smile on his face. One punch. That was all it took. Blood coated his knuckles, clearly not his own. He didn't spare a glance at the instructor lying on the ground. Instead, he turned away and began to leave. It's not wise to arbitrarily decide a student's limits, he said. But just as he was about to walk away in satisfaction, Will felt it, the ground shifting beneath his feet. He reacted instantly, jumping away from where he stood. Behind him, the instructor rose slowly. His glasses were broken. And there was something unsettling about him now. Something almost possessed. Will turned to him and said, I thought you said I'd pass if I landed a single hit? But the teacher had no intention of keeping up the act anymore. He spat out an excuse, saying there were no witnesses around and that he couldn't allow a mere healer to defeat him in battle. With that, he cast another spell, raising massive blocks of mud toward Will. Will let out a quiet sigh, disappointment evident on his face. Removing my limiters isn't just for throwing punches, he said. He dodged the line of mud spikes in his path and shot forward at incredible speed. The teacher didn't even have time to react. He couldn't see Will coming, let alone form his so-called grand form absolute. Instinctively, he shut his eyes, bracing for impact. But the punch never came. Or rather, it hadn't arrived yet. Will's fist hovered just an inch from his face, moving as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. Then, a few seconds later, the punch landed. To the teacher, it felt as though time had stretched infinitely. The impact was far worse than any ordinary blow. Every second dragged on like an eternity of pain. He couldn't endure it, but he also couldn't escape it. After what felt like endless agony, his body was sent flying like a rag doll, crashing into the school walls several feet away. As he collapsed to the ground, Will walked toward him with a faint smile. Welcome back, he said calmly. For you, it probably felt like ages, but it was only an instant. The instructor, completely bewildered, struggled to comprehend what had just happened and demanded an explanation. Will obliged. The moment my fists connected, I cast sensory heightening on you, he said. It's originally meant to help people with impaired vision or hearing. I've been using it to enhance my own reaction speed in combat. He paused. But I applied it to you at an excessive level. As a result, the instructor's senses had been amplified to an unnatural degree, so much so that a single second felt like 1,000. He had just experienced, in excruciating detail, what it meant to be struck under those conditions. Will stepped closer and looked down at him. I have another question, he said. Do I pass the supplementary lesson? Before the instructor could respond, Will's tone deepened. It might be difficult to get rid of that ingrained discrimination of yours, but if you decide to stand in my way again, I'll make sure the consequences are etched into your body so you never forget. He paused, his gaze steady. I just want to attend my classes. And of course, I don't want other students getting in my way either. Then he smiled, as if he hadn't just issued a threat. As the instructor made his way back into the school building, he couldn't process what he was feeling. Who was that boy? He had always believed healers were passive, people who lacked the will to stand up for themselves. But Will was different. It wasn't just his combat ability. That overwhelming presence. It was closer to killing intent. Alps approached him in the corridor, wearing a smug smile. So, are you done with the supplementary classes? To his surprise, the instructor snapped at him to be quiet. He warned Alps to stay away from Will, and told him it was for his own good. It's a mistake to think of him as just a healer, he said firmly. Alps frowned, clearly dissatisfied. He complained childishly, saying that wasn't what he wanted to hear, and threatened to report everything to his father. But the teacher was no longer intimidated. Not after what he had witnessed. Go ahead, he said bluntly. If you have a problem, take it up with your father yourself instead of whining to me every day. As he walked away, he added one final remark. Before your family can even make a move, it's far more likely that he'll bare his fangs and tear everything apart. It seemed Alps wasn't as influential as he had made himself out to be. Over the next few days, surprisingly peaceful days, Will finally had some room to breathe. After a long study session, he leaned back at his desk and glanced at Alps. There was still resentment in his eyes, but he hadn't made a move since. It was clear the instructor's warning had reached him. Will almost felt a hint of pity. But this was far from over. Will couldn't afford to be satisfied with just this. If he wanted to change the future, one where humanity faced extinction, he needed to grow stronger. His current method of using healing magic for physical reinforcement was effective, but limited. Right now, all he could do was enhance his body and strike with brute force. Compared to the versatility of true offensive magic, he still had a long way to go. It was time to develop a new fighting style. Once he had formed a rough idea, Will went to consult Veronica. Before addressing his question, Veronica told Will that he had done well. She mentioned that he had become quite the topic of discussion among the teachers. For someone like him to keep up with the classes at Schwartz was considered a remarkable feat, though most of the teachers seemed rather displeased about it. Will hesitated for a moment before asking if she had told anyone that it was her idea for him to use his own magic in battle. Veronica replied that she hadn't intentionally hidden it, but she rarely interacted with the other professors, so she simply hadn't had the opportunity to mention it. Will let out an awkward smile. That's a relief, he said. I would have felt terrible if my actions had put you in a difficult position. She shrugged it off, saying she didn't care about such things and that he didn't need to worry. Then she added that she was actually the one who felt grateful. That caught Will off guard. Turning toward him, she explained. As I said before, because of their nature, healers rarely think of putting theory into practice. I was curious to see what a fighting healer would actually look like. She then unsheathed her sword. Will blinked in confusion. What are you doing? I want to assess your current level, she replied calmly. If you want to know how to get stronger. Will panicked slightly. Sparring with you might be a bit too much. But Veronica didn't entertain the objection. There are no timeouts on the battlefield, she said, and charged at him. Will quickly drew the dagger from his pocket, and barely managed to evade her first strike. But that was only the beginning. He seized a brief opening and stepped back, narrowly escaping another swing of her blade. Even with his reaction speed enhanced by magic, he could barely keep up. Veronica wasn't just fast. Her movements were precise, refined, and relentless, forming a continuous barrage of sword strikes. Simply boosting his body with physical reinforcement had its limits. Still, he had one last option, a burst of speed he hadn't revealed yet. But to use it effectively, he needed to catch her off guard. Will attempted to launch a surprise attack using his hidden trump card. But he underestimated her. Just as he moved in to strike, Veronica's blade flashed, cleanly slicing his weapon apart before it could reach her. Even at his best, he couldn't defeat her. Veronica paused, slightly surprised. You actually forced me to use my magic sword, she said. I expected you to fight like a typical healer, but this. She studied him for a moment. You have the skill to rank among the top battle mages of your age. Will thanked her for the compliment, but it wasn't enough for him. Veronica found his ambition impressive. Now, she addressed the question he had originally asked. She understood that physical reinforcement alone wasn't satisfying him. Offering another analogy, she said, a sword isn't just meant for swinging. You can thrust with it, or even throw it. So there must be other ways to use healing magic as well. Will admitted that he had thought along similar lines but hadn't been able to come up with anything concrete. Veronica concluded that his limitations stemmed from a lack of real battle experience. Knowledge is important, but experience teaches you far more. Will asked if he should continue sparring with her. She nodded, saying it wasn't a bad idea, but then brought up something more significant, an upcoming field training exercise focused on monster subjugation. This training involved collaboration between 3 academies. The Offensive Magic Academy, Schwartz, and the Healing Magic Academy, Heilig, were already familiar. The third was the Silbern Sword Academy. During this field exercise, students from all 3 institutions would form parties and take on real subjugation requests. Although Will hadn't participated in such an event in his past life, this time, he was determined. He would join the expedition. It would be his first real monster hunt. However, participation wasn't guaranteed. Students were required to pass a selection exam conducted by the academy. Only those who cleared it would be allowed to take part. Will tried to learn more about the selection exam from Veronica. She explained that it was essentially a large-scale battle among students. Every year, around 100 participants applied, but only a select few, those who proved their strength, were chosen. This was very different from Heilig. There were hardly any volunteers, so no selection test was needed. The contrast reminded Will of his old days, and he found himself wondering what his former professor was doing now. Veronica, however, warned him about the academy's prodigy. She said securing first place wouldn't be easy for him. Still, she reassured him, since she would be helping him, he didn't need to worry too much for now. The day of the exam arrived sooner than expected. As Will entered the hall, he was approached by the headmaster, Goldram. The elderly man carried a trace of guilt, apologizing for taking so long to come see him. He mentioned that his granddaughter was doing well now, thanks to Will. Goldram then asked how Will was adjusting to the school. Not wanting to burden him with his troubles, Will replied that he had struggled at first, but everything was fine now. He added, with a hint of excitement, that he was aiming for first place in the selection exam. The headmaster looked impressed by his determination. Just then, another instructor approached them, mocking Will's ambition as a joke. His name was Bord. As the supervisor for this year's field training, he claimed he would be teaching Will a few things. Will vaguely remembered him, but none of those memories were pleasant. He was known as Purple Lightning Bord, another man who looked down on healer fighters. Sensing the tension, the headmaster quickly intervened, urging them to stop arguing as the competition was about to begin. For a world-renowned academy, the instructors were remarkably insufferable. Bord scoffed, insisting he wasn't arguing, it was simply his teaching style. Then he added, almost smugly, that Will's opponent would be Sirius Blue Note, the prodigy of the Schwartz Academy. That explained his arrogance. We'll see how talented this prodigy really is, Will thought. On the battlefield, Will was surprised to spot Erica among the participants. When he asked, she admitted she had no choice. If she didn't participate, her parents would cut off her allowance. The headmaster addressed the students and explained the rules. They were free to unleash their full strength and fighting spirit. After a set period of time, those still standing would advance to the main event. At first glance, the arena seemed far too small for 100 students to battle at once. But this was a magic academy. With a single strike of his staff against the ground, the headmaster activated a spell, and an entirely new dimension unfolded beneath their feet. Will found himself standing in what looked like a forest behind the academy. For the moment, he was alone. Then, the headmaster's voice echoed from all directions. He informed the students that they had all been randomly teleported. Their starting locations were purely based on luck, but from here on, they were free to form alliances and proceed however they wished. Will immediately sprang into action, leaping onto the branch of a nearby tree. His first move was to suppress his presence and conceal his identity. He had a very deliberate reason for doing so. Now hidden, he planned to observe other students, wait for them to clash, and then take advantage of the situation, collecting spells and opportunities as they arose. Passing the exam alone would be a waste of potential. As well observed from his vantage point, 3 students were locked in combat. One of them, who wielded a golem-type magic creature, managed to defeat the other 2 and stood there, satisfied with his victory. But that satisfaction didn't last long. Will silently approached from behind and used a consciousness sever spell, taking him down without causing any real damage. This technique required a firm grip on the target's head, sending them into a temporary coma. It was something Will had developed during his recent training. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from behind him. In the next instant, a barrage of daggers flew toward him. He didn't even need to turn around. Will sighed. Alps clearly didn't know when to give up. And this time, he had brought 2 lackeys along. Alps smirked, declaring that he would win the exam using every bit of power at his disposal. The 3 of them cast their spells in unison. Knife creation magic, poison enchantment magic, shadow replication magic. Together, they unleashed a massive swarm of lethal daggers aimed straight at Will. Will stood still for a moment, calmly assessing the situation. He knew that even if he were struck, he could heal himself, but dodging such a large number of projectiles would be difficult. Since it had come to this, why not test something new? Will activated a technique he had recently acquired, the golem. As the creature materialized, the incoming daggers were deflected and scattered without harming him. This golem functioned by using the caster's blood as a catalyst, allowing it to move autonomously. Will controlled it by supplying vitality through his healing magic. Without hesitation, he followed up with another technique, pseudo-life bestowal, and launched a counterattack. The golem struck Alp's lackeys in a single sweep, overwhelming them instantly. Alp shouted for them to fight back, hiding behind them as if they could shield him from a literal stone creature. It was useless. By the time he realized it, Will was already within arm's reach. With a firm grip on his head, Will calmly whispered, "Good night." In subsequent encounters, Will maintained the same strategy. Perched on a tree branch, he controlled the golem remotely, letting it handle the fights while he observed from a safe distance. Then, something changed. A massive tornado suddenly tore through the area. With no regard for anything in its path, it swept across the battlefield like a force of nature. Will's opponents, and even his golem, were caught in the storm and rendered unconscious. Will himself barely managed to leap off the tree in time, narrowly escaping being pulled into the chaos. He looked toward the source of the destruction. One glance was enough. Now he understood why Sirius was called a prodigy. Before they could engage in battle, an announcement echoed across the field. Time was up. Only 4 participants remained standing. They had successfully passed the exam. Headmaster Golgram summoned them back to the academy grounds and dismissed them, instructing them to rest before the main event the next day. Will and Sirius exchanged a brief glance. They both had the same look in their eyes. Anticipation. Will returned straight to his room, wondering how to spend the time until the main event. Meanwhile, Alps was burning with frustration. He was determined to take revenge. His lackeys tried to reason with him, pointing out that pursuing Will was a waste of time, especially given his obvious talent. But Alps, stubborn as ever, lashed out at them. He mocked them for coming from lesser noble families, claiming that was why they couldn't understand the humiliation of being defeated by a nobody healer. Having had enough, his lackeys abandoned him, refusing to get beaten again for his pride. Left alone, Alps began considering other methods. If magic wouldn't work, he would find another way to bring Will down. When someone knocked on Will's door late at night, he immediately had a bad feeling about it. That intuition proved correct when he opened the door and found Alps standing there. Alps began with a smile and some meaningless small talk, but Will had no intention of entertaining him. "What are you plotting?" he asked bluntly. Alps' so-called brilliant plan was simple. He told Will to leave the academy. Will stepped out of his room and stood directly in front of him. "I really appreciate your dedication to trying to get rid of me," he said calmly. "But why do you treat healers like enemies?" Alps scoffed. "I don't need a reason to hate healers." He went on to explain that even his own family had sent his brother, who was born a healer, to a branch family, simply because he was considered weak. He mocked his brother for smiling at people despite how they treated him. "A true battle mage would never stay silent," he said. Will's expression hardened as he listened to the deeply ingrained prejudice in Ulp's words. After finishing his rant, Ulps repeated his demand. Will should leave the academy if he understood his place. Will met his gaze, defiance clear in his eyes. Do you really expect me to just say, fine, I quit? Ulp smirked. I'll make you say it. Then he revealed the true extent of his intentions. He had investigated Will's family. He knew about his sister. With a single order to his servants, he claimed, Will would never be able to see her again. He stepped closer. Does that help you make your decision? Will answered flatly. Yes. For a brief moment, Ulps looked satisfied, until the next instant. Will grabbed him by the neck and slammed him to the ground. He didn't give him a chance to recover. Pinning him down with a knee to his shoulder, Will twisted his arm at an unnatural angle. Ulp screamed, begging him to stop. I told you, Will said calmly. I've made my decision. Then he applied more force. The arm broke, again and again, at multiple points. Ulps howled in pain, his voice cracking as he threatened to report everything to the academy once he was free. Before he could even finish, Will healed his arm. And broke it again. He healed it. And broke it again. Over and over, like a toy being snapped apart. Ulps begged for mercy, but Will didn't stop. His resolve wasn't as weak as Ulps assumed a healer's would be. And he couldn't afford to show hesitation, not when his sister's safety was at stake. Until you swear, Will said coldly, that you will never go near my sister again, I won't stop. At that moment, Ulps no longer saw Will as a person. He saw something far worse. A devil wearing the skin of a healer. What he was experiencing was more terrifying than death itself. His pride, his arrogance, his beliefs, everything collapsed. In the end, he broke. He swore he would never interfere with Will again. Once Ulp's spirit was completely shattered, Will released him. Good night, he said, offering a final warning not to meddle in his affairs again. If nothing else, the encounter had cleared Will's mind. Now he could rest. Tomorrow was the main event. The final stage was a one-on-one tournament between the 4 remaining participants. Surprisingly, Erica was among them. Apparently, she had created a wall of fire and stayed hidden within it for most of the exam, advancing through sheer luck rather than direct combat. Will couldn't help but wonder how she planned to make it any further with that strategy. Since they were friends, Erica asked him to go easy on her. He refused without hesitation. Still, Erica wasn't backing down. Now that she had secured her allowance, she had her sights set on something more, a raise. Their match began. Erica made the first move, launching a burst of fire toward him. But the flames lacked intensity. Will could easily heal through that level of damage. With a small sigh, he apologized in advance, preparing to brush off the attack. It seemed he had underestimated her. The fire that touched him didn't fade away. From across the field, Erica shouted that she was just getting started and launched another blast of flames. Will quickly realized, it was her unique magic. Even if the raw firepower wasn't overwhelming, her flames had abnormal persistence. That made them extremely dangerous. If he kept taking hits, the damage would accumulate, and this wasn't something he could simply heal away. He recalled the moment she had handed him a fireball before and understood just how difficult it would be to approach her if she surrounded herself with those same flames. The crowd erupted as they watched Erica take the offensive against Will. Though both of them were considered outcasts, Will was far more disliked. Naturally, the students began cheering for Erica the moment they saw her power. Those cheers fueled her confidence. She began to believe she could actually defeat him. Now's your chance to surrender, she called out. Will smiled. You don't need to worry about that, he replied calmly. I was just about to counterattack. He intensified his healing magic, suppressing and extinguishing the flames clinging to him. Erica had expected resistance, but not this. Without giving him any room to recover, she launched another attack. But this time, Will adapted. He used her own strength against her. Catching her next fire blast with his hand, he redirected it, his fist now engulfed in her persistent flames, and drove it straight into her. The impact decided the match. Will was declared the winner. The same crowd that had cheered for Erica moments ago now turned on her, their voices shifting to jeers. Will ignored them. He stepped forward, helped Erica up, and spoke gently. You fought well, he said, taking her hand. He healed her injuries and reassured her that she still had a chance to pass. But then, Bord appeared behind her. With a cold expression, he dismissed her completely. If you lost to a mere healer, you're no better than him, he said. Just another piece of trash. He told her to leave. Erica, shaken, hurried away. Will didn't move. That's too harsh to say to a student, he said firmly. Board glared at him like a predator. I'm the supervisor, he replied. It's my job to point out weakness. Consider it tough love. There was no real reason for him to be there, other than to belittle them. As he turned to leave, he added, Looks like there'll only be one winner this year. Then, a voice came from behind. Move! Will turned, startled. The presence behind him had been so silent, he hadn't even noticed it. Sirius. As Sirius walked past, Will asked if he agreed with Board's views. Sirius replied simply, Strength is everything. Board is strong, so he's right. Will sighed at the rigid mindset. But Sirius continued, Still, I don't think you're weak. He turned slightly. I want to prove that I'm the one who's right. Will recalled something from his past life, a terrifying mage from the northern front. A wielder of wind so powerful it could erase everything in its path. It had to be him. As they took their positions, Will spoke. Professor Board won't acknowledge me unless I win this championship, he said. So I'm going to win. An instructor stepped forward and signaled the start of the match. Sirius didn't hesitate for even a second. He unleashed a vertical tornado instantly. Will enhanced his body with healing magic and dodged it with lightning speed. Sirius found Will's speed irritating, so he launched his second attack. Unlike the tornado, this one spread outward, tendrils of wind sweeping across a wide area, blowing everything away in their path. Not intending to be swept off his feet, Will decided it was time to use one of his special techniques. He cast a spell onto his hand, pressed it against the ground along with a seed, and in an instant, a massive tree erupted before him. Watching from the sidelines, Erica was thrilled to see how much Will had grown. Will, meanwhile, recalled the first time he had used this spell. He had demonstrated it to Veronica, explaining that he had learned a form of offensive magic that manipulated plants and believed he could make it work. As he talked about adapting his tactics based on different plant types, his vision suddenly blurred. He nearly collapsed on the spot. If Veronica hadn't caught him, he would have hit the ground face first. When she asked if he was all right, he brushed it off, saying he had simply run out of mana. The textbook hadn't mentioned how taxing the spell would be. Veronica studied him for a moment before replying. It's just as I thought. Healing is harder than destroying. She explained that healing magic consumed far more mana than offensive magic. Trying to replicate offensive techniques using healing magic would almost always be inefficient in comparison. Back in the present battle, Will believed he could still win through strategy, even without natural talent for offensive magic. But that confidence was shattered in an instant. Sirius launched razor-sharp wind blades, slicing the massive tree cleanly in half. Will quickly reassessed the situation. Sirius possessed a powerful unique magic with virtually no openings, making him a true top-tier contender. Still, that wasn't enough to make Will give up. He began searching for even the smallest weakness, experimenting with different approaches as he tried to reach Sirius, who stood at the center of the storm. No matter what you do, you can't reach me, Sirius declared. At that moment, one of his attacks struck Will. For a split second, Sirius thought he saw him smile. Then, a thick plant shoot burst from the ground and pierced straight into his shoulder. Will explained calmly. Your tornado doesn't protect you from below. My plants grow underground and emerge wherever I want them to. He added, almost casually. And they're called rhizomes, not roots. Then, shifting the topic, Will asked. Why do you care so much about Professor Board? You don't seem alike at all. Sirius replied. He's strong. And he teaches me. Will pressed further. Just that? You don't need to learn from him specifically. You're from a noble family, right? Sirius fell silent for a moment before answering. In my family, magical strength is everything. Age and gender don't matter, the strongest becomes the head of the house. It sounded even harsher than Ulp's upbringing. Sirius continued. Everyone in my family is an enemy to each other. Even my own father refused to teach me magic. So he had no choice but to follow someone strong, like Board. With that, he ended the conversation. Sirius unleashed his ultimate technique, a wind dragon. Determined to end the match, he poured everything into the attack. As the massive construct of wind surged toward him, Will understood. Sirius was completely serious. Lately, Will had found himself enjoying these battles. But now, facing Sirius' true strength, something else stirred within him. A burning desire to win. To claim the title. Declaring that he would use his special seed. Will cast another spell into the ground. A different kind of plant erupted forth. Yggdrasil. Normally, such a massive tree would take years to grow, but forcing it to emerge instantly drained an immense amount of mana. Still, Will didn't hesitate. He poured everything he had into it. Sirius responded immediately, slicing through it with his wind dragon. He exhaled, almost dismissively. That was easier than expected, he thought. But then, a shadow loomed overhead. A single branch, which had been floating above him unnoticed, suddenly expanded, transforming into a massive tree in an instant. Will spoke from below. This plant has exceptional vitality. Even a single branch can grow into a giant. Sirius' expression changed. Mid-attack, with his defenses committed elsewhere, he had no time to react. In the next moment, the enormous tree came crashing down directly onto him. Sirius tried his best to escape, sprinting away, but he was still caught beneath a heavy branch. Will approached him in slow, steady strides and pointed his dagger at Sirius' face. Sirius didn't resist. He immediately accepted defeat, declaring Will the winner. The entire arena fell silent. A healer, defeating Sirius in a one-on-one match? Was he really that strong? Will stepped forward to help Sirius out from under the fallen tree. That was a good match, he said. But Sirius shook his head. No, it wasn't. Before Will could ask what he meant, Professor Board stormed onto the field. With a thunderous strike, he kicked the massive tree aside. Grabbing Sirius with one arm, he turned and walked away. You failed, he said coldly. We start your training from scratch. The students, already intimidated by him, fell completely silent as he began shouting at them as well. It's a disgrace, he barked, that a healer took first place in a combat academy. From behind him, Will spoke calmly. You're being a bit too tyrannical, he continued. It's true that I won, but that doesn't mean Sirius is weak. It was a close match. If we fought again. Before he could finish, Board turned around, his expression dark and menacing. Don't talk back, he warned. He stepped toward Will and tossed Sirius to another instructor. You idiot, he said. On the battlefield, strength is everything. If you lose, you're treated like scum, and you die. That's it. Will observed the way he treated even his own disciple. Then I defeated Sirius, didn't I? Will replied. I proved my strength. I don't deserve to be looked down on just because I'm a healer. Board's gaze hardened. With just that level? He said. Talent is cruel. You'll hit your ceiling soon enough and end up among the weak. He pointed out the inefficiency in Will's mana usage. When someone weak enters the battlefield, they don't just die, they become dead weight. Those words triggered a memory in Will. A moment from his past life. A disciple had died. Board had blamed Will and another healer for it. Back then, Will had argued. It was true that healers couldn't fight on the front lines, but they did their best to support through healing. It was a division of roles. Without cooperation, humanity wouldn't survive. Board had gone silent for a moment, before revealing what had really happened. His disciple had stayed behind on the front lines to buy time for the healer to escape. But the escape point had already been overrun by minor monsters. The healer was killed instantly. His disciple, already wounded and with nowhere left to retreat, was eventually overwhelmed and died as well. Board had been furious. For the sake of someone so weak, why did my disciple have to die? Now, standing in the present, Will understood. Board wasn't entirely wrong. If you were weak, you couldn't protect anything. That realization brought him back to his original goal. To fight with his own two hands. With the looming threat of monsters going berserk, mere ideals wouldn't be enough. People like him needed to learn how to fight too. So Will made a decision. He looked directly at Board and said, I want a one-on-one match with you. Board smiled. Then, turning to the nearby instructor, he said, Announce the match. And take that trash with you when you leave. The instructor hesitated. You're serious? You're going to fight a student? Board didn't even blink. In this selection exam, I am the rule. There was no arguing with that. The instructor let out a quiet sigh and announced the special match. Professor Board versus Will. Board grinned, baring his teeth. He was ready to show just how insignificant all of them really were. Will was running low on mana, and Board was the strongest opponent he had faced yet. There was no way he could win this fight by conventional means. So he made a decision. He moved first. But Board immediately dismissed it. "You're too slow." A bolt of lightning struck down. Through the crackling aftermath, Board began lecturing, assuming Will had already been incapacitated. He outlined the 3 reasons his victory was absolute. First, distance, the ability to suppress an enemy from afar. Second, speed, the ability to prevent them from taking action. And third, power, the ability to kill in a single blow. "With these," he said coldly, "my opponent doesn't stand a chance." He scoffed, adding that Will couldn't even hear him anymore. But then, from within the fading smoke, a voice answered. "Then where was that single blow?" Will stepped forward. He had anticipated Board's unique lightning magic. To minimize the damage, he had created a crude but effective conduit. He stabbed his own hand and directed the lightning through it, channeling the current away from his vital organs. Guided by the blood flowing along his arm, he forced the energy downward through his body and into the ground, reducing the impact. Even so, surviving that attack had nearly drained him completely. But he couldn't stop now. Will attempted to cast another spell, and nearly collapsed. His body refused to respond. That's when Board spoke again. "It's an absolute rule of my magic," he said. "Anyone struck by my purple lightning is paralyzed." He raised his hand, preparing another strike. With what little strength he had left, Will used the same conduit method again to endure the next attack. But this time, the realization hit him clearly. Board's unique magic had no obvious openings. Even so, Will refused to give up. He would fight until his very last drop of mana. Summoning what little he had left, he pulled out his final seed and cast his spell. A jewel tree erupted from the ground. This tree absorbed vast amounts of water from the earth and stored it within its structure. Will intended to use it as a shield. If the lightning struck, the current would disperse through the moisture. But before he could even complete the thought, Board sliced the tree clean in half. Board walked forward unimpressed. "Pathetic," he said. "Resorting to defense at the end." He stopped mid-sentence. Something on the tree trunk caught his attention. A small mushroom sprouted. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire tree was covered in thick clusters of bright red mushrooms. Will pulled the dagger from his hand and let out a faint breath. "Even I didn't expect it to work this well," he admitted. He explained calmly. "Some species of plants and fungi grow explosively after a lightning strike. A forest struck by lightning has no competition, it becomes the perfect environment for rapid growth." He glanced at the spreading clusters. "These are called foam-capped mushrooms." He paused. "And that's not their only property." Board stared at them for a moment. Then realization dawned on him. His body began to feel numb. Now that his advantage in range had been neutralized, Will moved. With a final burst of speed, he charged forward and threw a punch. Even I thought that was the end, but Board smiled. He caught Will mid-attack and drove a lightning-charged fist straight through his chest. Will collapsed to the ground, coughing up blood. Board was clearly superior in close combat as well. "I use electricity to reinforce my body and accelerate my movements," he said coldly. "That little numbness? It might as well be non-existent for me." Will couldn't move anymore. Even after everything he had done, he was still going to lose. Board raised his hand, preparing to finish the fight with one final strike. But a sword stopped him. Its edge rested against his neck. "Stop." Veronica's voice was firm. She told him he had gone far enough. Board scoffed. "Don't interfere just because you're a rookie." But Veronica didn't back down. "The match is already decided," she said. "Anything beyond this is meaningless harm." Board argued that Will could simply heal himself and continue. "That's only if he has any mana left," she countered. Board's expression darkened. He surged forward, increasing his power. "That's because he lacks the resolve." Veronica stepped forward as well, matching his intent. "That's a ridiculous claim." Just as they were about to clash, an invisible force stopped them both. Headmaster Goldgram hovered above, his presence overwhelming. "This is pointless," he said calmly. Though clearly irritated, Board had no choice but to obey. He turned to Veronica and apologized for something she didn't quite understand. Then, addressing the crowd, he announced that the selection exam for the field training had concluded and ordered everyone to disperse. Meanwhile, Will lay on the ground, struggling to heal himself. His recovery was painfully slow. Even now, he was fixated on winning, but those thoughts began to fade as Veronica lifted him into her arms. "You did well," she said gently. "Don't push yourself any further. Rest." Will nodded. But in his mind he knew doing well wasn't enough. The next day, as Will walked through the corridor, he reflected on what he had witnessed. The strength of a top-tier battle mage wasn't just about raw power. Their tactics, control, and refinement were on an entirely different level. And yet, even with people like that, humanity had still gone extinct. He still had a long, long way to go. Eventually, he arrived at the headmaster's office. Goldgram greeted him warmly, saying he was glad Will had come. He asked about his injuries, and to his surprise, Will felt fine. Will explained that once his mana had recovered, his healing had restored him almost instantly. Hearing that, the headmaster smiled. "In that case, there will be no issue with your participation in the field training." Will was taken aback. Goldgram continued, "It's only natural. You won the selection exam." He added that Sirius and Erica had also passed and would be participating as well. Will brought up what Board had said about everyone failing. Goldgram chuckled. "He says that every year," he explained. "It's his way of instilling urgency in the students, forcing them to take things seriously. In the end, he still selects a few who are qualified. After all, field training involves real danger." Will didn't agree with Board's methods, but he couldn't deny that there was logic behind them. Finally, the headmaster gave his instructions. Will was to form a party with students from the other academies and take on real monster subjugation requests as a battle mage. This would be Will's first encounter with monsters since his regression. 5 years from now, they would be the very reason for humanity's extinction. In this world, monsters are defined as any living creatures that possess mana. Not all of them are hostile toward humanity. They may attack humans, but often only out of instinct for survival. If properly understood, some of them can even be utilized or coexisted with. However, all of this is destined to change. In about 2 years, the red moon will appear. Monsters that bathe in its light will go berserk. Regardless of species, they will begin to form organized packs and hunt humans without reason or restraint. Then, 2 years after that, the Demon King will descend. From that point onward, humanity will be pushed to the brink of extinction. Battle mages, swordsmen, and even healers on the front lines will be slaughtered indiscriminately. By the time Will met his end in his previous life, only a handful of humans remained. As the headmaster spoke about monsters, Will's blood began to churn with those memories. The weight of what he had seen, and lost, surged back into him. At the same time, his resolve strengthened. He would not allow that future to repeat. Goldram noticed the intensity in his expression and simply nodded, wishing him luck. The day of departure finally arrived. As Will and Erica prepared to board the carriage, Sirius and Professor Board appeared. The moment Will saw Board, he tried to speak. He wanted to say that he now understood why his methods were so harsh. But Board cut him off immediately. With a piercing gaze, he said he had no idea what Will was talking about, and warned him not to get arrogant. Will dropped the attempt. As Board walked past him, he added one last remark. If Will truly understood anything, then he should take the field training seriously. Then, almost as an afterthought, he thanked him for treating Sirius. Will watched him leave with a faint smile. Sirius approached him soon after. He thanked Will as well, which caught him off guard, as usual. Surprisingly, Sirius seemed energized by his loss in the selection exam. Rather than being discouraged, he was excited about how much he could grow during the field training. He even repeated one of Board's teachings, that if you survive long enough to take revenge, then it's not truly a defeat. Will found himself agreeing. He wished Sirius luck in becoming stronger. The two exchanged a brief fist bump before Sirius went his own way. It was reassuring to see more battle mages rising. It would certainly make a difference when facing the monsters ahead. Veronica soon arrived and urged them to get moving. After a long journey, they finally neared the Dunkel Forest. Before they arrived, Veronica went over the mission details one last time with Will and Erica. This time, They would be handling a real subjugation request, eliminating a nest of goblins in the forest. Each party would consist of one student from Schwartz, one from Heilig, one from Silbern, and a supervising teacher, making it a 4-person team. Erica asked whether the party members had already been decided. Veronica confirmed that they had, and that Erica would be in her group. Erica visibly relaxed. Being paired with someone she knew was far better than being assigned to strangers, even if Veronica herself was somewhat intimidating. Just as Veronica was about to reveal Will's team, the carriage came to a halt. They had arrived. The moment Will stepped out, someone rushed toward him. A bold, energetic girl threw her arms around him in an enthusiastic hug, exclaiming that she had been waiting a long time to meet him. Will froze, raising his hands awkwardly. "I have no idea who you are," he admitted. The girl pulled back, looking slightly disappointed for a brief moment. But her smile quickly returned as she introduced herself. "Marie Goldgramp," she said cheerfully. "The headmaster's granddaughter. Will never expected to meet her again like this." The moment he recognized her, he immediately asked about her health. Marie smiled brightly and said she felt fantastic now. She also apologized, explaining that she hadn't been able to properly thank him back then. Will waved it off, saying it was fine. After all, her grandfather had helped him greatly in return. Marie then revealed something unexpected. She said she had no talent for magic, but she still wanted to repay him somehow. So, she enrolled in Silbern and trained in swordsmanship with everything she had. Thanks to that effort, she had topped the selection exam at her academy. That, however, was a little concerning to Will. She had gone from being bettered into ranking first in such a short time. For a brief moment, he wondered if she was some kind of monster herself. And just like that, they ended up in the same party. They exchanged a firm handshake, wishing each other luck for the training ahead. Now, Will finally understood why the headmaster had said he was counting on him. Marie grabbed Will by the arm and excitedly dragged him toward the rest of their party members. Will couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Somewhere in his mind, he wondered if his old professor from his past life might be part of this group. At a glance, the two girls left behind, Veronica and Erica, seemed slightly annoyed at how lively the pair ahead of them looked. Marie led Will to a nearby carriage and called out for Mr. Urin and Mr. Toff. The moment Will heard the name, Urin, his expression froze in shock. And then, the man himself stepped out of the carriage, casually telling Marie not to rush him. Urin Kaitos, a teacher from the Heilig Academy. Will couldn't hide his reaction. He even found himself blushing slightly at the sight of him. He had been right. Behind Urin, another man, Toff, struggled to step out of the carriage, telling his teacher to move aside. Marie introduced herself to him, which made him blush a little. But the moment he noticed Will, his expression changed. He had clearly seen them holding hands earlier. That explained the reaction. Toff asked who Will was. Will answered enthusiastically that he was from Schwartz. Toff responded with a sharp, skeptical glance. Meanwhile, Urin stretched lazily and told the students to do whatever they wanted. He was only there to observe. Marie seemed slightly taken aback by his laid-back attitude, but Will reassured her that this was just how he was. Will quickly followed Urin and asked if it would be alright for him to call him Master. Urin raised an eyebrow and asked why. Will explained that he had healing abilities but no proper mentor, and he hoped to learn from him. That seemed to surprise Urin, especially the fact that Will could use both types of magic, but he didn't question it further. "Call me whatever you want," he said casually. Marie immediately chimed in, saying that if Will was calling him Master, she wanted to do the same. Toff followed behind her, clearly flustered, trying to keep up with her energy. It was quite a chaotic party. Out of nowhere, Veronica and Erica appeared, commenting that things seemed to be going well for them, but they had no intention of losing. For this subjugation mission, each party was assigned a specific area, along with a hut that would serve as their base of operations. Since the goblin nest was deeper within the forest, Will, Marie, and Urin decided to head out first. As in real combat situations, healers were expected to remain at the base rather than fight on the front lines. As they moved forward, Marie pointed out something interesting. Urin, despite being a mage, was heading toward the front lines with them. Technically, he was the supervisor of their group. Even so, he repeated that they were free to act as they pleased and that there was no need for strict formalities. What they didn't seem to notice was that they were already being watched. Goblins lurked nearby, observing their movements. Marie, full of enthusiasm, declared that she would give it her all. Will glanced at her sword and asked if that was what she meant by her might. She smiled and unsheathed her blade. At that very moment, the goblins moved in from behind her. Unfazed, Marie spoke confidently. I'll swing this sword with all my might. And in a single motion, she cut through a group of goblins in one strike. Will watched in silence. He couldn't help but reflect on the difference between the girl he had first met and the warrior standing before him now. Will found himself mesmerized by her swordsmanship. It was so refined, so decisive, that for a moment he wondered if she alone might be enough to complete this entire mission. But the situation quickly shifted. More goblins began to emerge, surrounding them from all sides. Their master calmly observed Marie's movements and nodded in appreciation. Her swordsmanship was impressive, but it wasn't flawless. She leaves herself wide open, he remarked. Will looked at him in confusion, prompting him to elaborate. The girl is excellent at charging headfirst, he said, but she becomes vulnerable when surrounded. Then he turned to Will. Cover for her. This was it. The moment he had been working toward, the reason he had been reborn. And yet, as Will stood on the battlefield, facing real monsters for the first time, his body froze. Just one look at them was enough to make him stiffen in place. Yurin noticed immediately. He stepped forward and tapped Will lightly on the shoulder. Relax, he said. That was all it took. A single, reassuring smile, and Will found his resolve returning. It seemed he only needed a small push. With renewed focus, Will cast his spell and struck down most of the goblins surrounding Marie. The two of them then stood back to back, covering each other's blind spots. From a distance, Yurin observed them quietly, and for the first time, he truly recognized Will's capability. The technique Will used was something he had developed during his training with Veronica, and it proved effective even against monsters. Even the blade he wielded now, borrowed from Erica, felt perfectly balanced in his hand. It was nothing like the crude dagger he had taken from Ulps before. Marie beamed with satisfaction at their teamwork and praised Will enthusiastically. Their master simply tapped both of them on the back and said that was enough for the day. Then, without ceremony, he began walking back toward their base. As they followed, Marie noticed something strange. Despite the intensity of the fight, her body felt unusually light, as if she hadn't exerted herself at all. Will smiled. That's thanks to him, he said. She blinked in realization. That casual tap earlier. If one were to measure healing magic, they might consider factors like the severity of injuries one could treat or the complexity of diseases one could cure. But Yurin's strength lay elsewhere. His healing was so fast, so seamless, that people often didn't even realize it had happened. Because of that, his true skill was rarely recognized, except by other healers. Will had once asked him about it. Yurin's answer had been as effortless as his demeanor. I'm not doing this for gratitude. If it's healed, that's all that matters. The world might not have realized it yet, but Yurin Kaido's was the best healer it had. That night, the four of them gathered inside their hut for dinner. Yurin casually remarked that their performance for the day deserved a passing grade. Toph shrugged and said he hadn't done much, since everyone had returned unharmed. But Yurin disagreed. Providing warm, good food for your team is also a healer's duty. They were eating Toph's specialty, a healing soup, enhanced with Yurin's carefully chosen spices. Apparently, it was a long-standing arrangement between them. Marie watched them with admiration. Our master is incredible, she said. Not just as a healer, he seems to understand combat as well. She asked why that was. Yurin answered simply. There are plenty of injured people on the front lines. If you treat them often enough, you naturally pick up the basics of combat. Toph added that his professor had spent years traveling across different battlefields, which was why he rarely taught regular classes. Marie looked surprised, noting how dangerous that must be. Yurin just shrugged. I'm good at running away, he said lightly. Will knew that wasn't true. He knew better than anyone that Yurin was always the first to rush toward the injured. And in his past life, losing him had been a devastating blow to humanity. Not just because he was an exceptional healer, but because he was one of the few who truly understood what needed to be done in real combat. Among all the things Will had resolved to change, he added one more. This time, he would not let his master die. As they continued their meal in relative peace, something far more ominous was unfolding deep within the forest. Someone had approached the goblins of the Dunkel forest. carrying the power of the red moon. Unaware of what awaited them, the three set out into the forest the next morning. Their teamwork had improved significantly in just a single day. At this pace, they had even joked the previous night that they might complete their mission by tomorrow. But that confidence didn't last long. After walking a few miles into the forest, their master suddenly told them to turn back. Marie immediately protested, pointing out that they hadn't even encountered a single monster yet. Will, however, sensed something was off. "Is there something ahead?" he asked. Urine shook his head. "It's the opposite," he replied. "There's too little of anything," he explained further. Goblins were highly territorial creatures. If an outsider entered their domain, they would normally swarm in numbers, just like they had the previous day. Yet now, despite walking deep into their territory, there hadn't been a single sighting. Will realized it too. Something was wrong. Without hesitation, he agreed they should retreat for now. While they were at it, he suggested gathering nearby parties and regrouping. If something unusual was happening, it was safer to move together. Marie recalled that Veronica's team had set up their base somewhere nearby. So they changed direction and headed toward it. As they walked, an uneasy feeling settled over Will. He couldn't stop thinking about his past life. He knew, logically, that it was too early for that to happen. And yet, the feeling wouldn't go away. Then they saw it. And Will froze. Erica. She was tied to a wooden pole, unconscious. Marie didn't hesitate. She rushed forward to save her, and immediately triggered a trap. "Marie!" Will shouted her name at the top of his lungs. Spikes shot up from the ground, but Marie managed to stop herself just in time, barely avoiding a fatal injury. There was no time to recover. Arrows suddenly rained down toward Will and Urine. Urine instinctively moved to shield Will, but Will stepped forward instead, positioning himself in front and dodging the incoming shots. And then, they appeared. A massive army of goblins emerged from the forest. Will's mind raced. This wasn't normal. They weren't acting like ordinary monsters. They were hunting, strategically, deliberately, just like the monsters after the red moon. Panic flickered within him. That shouldn't be happening yet. The red moon wasn't due for another 2 years. Was it already beginning? Will snapped back to reality. Now wasn't the time to analyze. This was exactly the kind of moment he had gained power for. He immediately cast his plant manipulation spell, combining it with what he had learned from his classmate. Wood golems rose from the ground at his command. "Marie, take the vanguard," he called out. "If the archers are positioned behind the melee units, they're vulnerable from the sides." Marie nodded, understanding instantly. She surged forward, channeling her strength into her sword, aiming to break through their formation. With a confident smile, she prepared to unleash her full power. But a stray goblin lunged at her from behind. "I've got the stragglers," Will said calmly. Behind them, Urine watched with approval. "You're doing well," he said. "I'll handle Erica." Will turned to him and nodded. "Please do." But in the very next moment, a chilling realization struck him. He remembered something. Something from the Red Moon era. Monsters didn't just go berserk. They began coordinating. Even across different species. Will, now surrounded by goblins, looked ahead. And saw it. An ogre. Rising from the ground. His heart dropped. The distance between him and Urine suddenly felt impossibly large. It was happening again. Just like in his past life. His master, a man who would never abandon the injured, was now completely exposed. No matter how skilled a healer was, living like that meant certain death. And Will had only just sworn to protect him this time. Yet now, right before his eyes, Urine stood defenseless, as the ogre's massive fist came crashing down. In the blink of an eye, Urine vanished from his position and reappeared behind the ogre. Will watched in shock as his master used physical reinforcement to evade the attack with incredible precision. The ogre swung again, but Urine effortlessly dodged and slipped behind its neck in one fluid motion. Without hesitation, he cast a spell, placing the massive creature into a deep sleep as if it were nothing more than a restless child. Will rushed toward him, relief flooding his expression. "Was that physical reinforcement just now?" he asked. Urine simply smiled and replied that a good master learns from his disciples as well. Both Will and Marie couldn't help but smile proudly at that response. Without wasting time, Urine moved to Erica, untying her from the wooden pole and checking her condition. "We need to leave," he said calmly, though the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. Will, however, glanced back at the goblins, his mind already calculating possibilities. With Yurin here, perhaps they could eliminate them. But Yurin quickly shut that idea down, sighing as he told Will not to be foolish. He reminded him that he was a healer. He had only put the ogre to sleep, not harmed it. Even if it was a monster, he had no intention of killing it. With a faint smile, he added that when it woke up, it would be perfectly fine. And with that, he turned and ran, forcing the others to follow. They broke through the goblin encirclement with difficulty, repelling a few persistent pursuers before finally escaping into open terrain. Once they were certain they were no longer being chased, they stopped to catch their breath. Yurin gently laid Erica down and began treating her. As she regained consciousness, she looked disoriented, clearly struggling to understand where she was. Before reassuring her, Will apologized and asked her to explain what had happened. Erica took a moment to gather her thoughts before speaking. She said that the previous day's hunt had gone smoothly, and she had managed without causing trouble for anyone. But when she woke up that morning, Veronica was gone. Her teammates had found a note from her, instructing them to wait, but there was no indication of when she would return. Worried for her safety, Erica had discussed it with the others, and eventually decided to go look for her. Will immediately understood what had happened. She had likely been persuaded into it, and couldn't refuse. That was just like her. But this wasn't something to laugh about. One wrong step, and she could have died. A flicker of frustration crossed Will's mind. She still didn't fully grasp that this wasn't a controlled school exercise. Still, he let her continue. Erica explained that once she entered the forest, she noticed a sweet smell, and after that, everything went blank. The next thing she remembered was being tied up. Yurin concluded that the goblins had used some kind of sleep-inducing substance. Combined with the traps and their coordination with the ogre, the situation didn't make sense. Goblins weren't supposed to operate like this. Something was clearly wrong, but this wasn't the time to analyze it in depth. They decided to move immediately and head toward Erica's base, as it was the closest safe location. But when they arrived, what they found was nothing but rubble. Marie frowned deeply. From what she knew, goblins were highly territorial creatures. They rarely ventured far beyond their domain. A base located outside their territory should have been safe. And yet, it had been completely destroyed. Will's unease only deepened. The more he saw, the more it reminded him of the events from his past life. Yurin examined the area and noted that there were no signs of a struggle. That likely meant Erica's teammates had escaped. He then made a decision. He would go search for them. Turning to the others, he instructed them to take Toph and leave the forest immediately. If one base had already been attacked, theirs might not be safe either. Without wasting time, they rushed back toward their own base. Thankfully, when they arrived, Toph was safe, casually preparing lunch as if nothing had happened. Marie ran up to him, relieved to see him unharmed. But Will didn't slow down. He immediately urged them to leave at once. Unfortunately, they were already too late. The monsters had been following them all along. Erica, despite her earlier ordeal, was still seeing this level of coordinated monster behavior for the first time. Her reaction was understandable. Will, however, had no room for hesitation. He had already been dwelling on his earlier helplessness. This was his chance to make up for it. He turned to Marie and Erica, a calm smile forming on his face despite the danger closing in around them. "Let's take them down," he said. "The three of us." He chose to believe they could win. Facing such a massive swarm, their coordination became absolutely critical. Will quickly took command, giving clear and precise instructions. He told Marie not to overextend herself like before and instead focus on controlled, supportive strikes. At the same time, he summoned his wood golems and positioned them as the front line, allowing them to absorb the initial pressure. Finally, he turned to Erica and instructed her to hold back the goblins' advance with her fire. Erica hesitated. The memory of being captured earlier still weighed heavily on her, and her confidence wavered. But Will looked back at her with a reassuring smile, and told her that her flames were exactly what they needed right now. That small encouragement was enough. She steadied herself and unleashed a barrage of fire toward the incoming goblins. The flames surged forward, successfully halting the front line, but it wasn't enough to stop the ogre. Will had already anticipated that. The ogre was on an entirely different level compared to the goblins. Without wasting a second, he shifted strategies. He recalled one of his wood golems and told Erica to direct her fire at it. By combining her flames with his construct, they created a burning force strong enough to momentarily stall the ogre's advance. That brief opening was all Marie needed. She charged in and struck the ogre with her massive sword, landing a powerful blow. Their teamwork was flawless, but still not enough. The ogre regenerated almost instantly, rising back to its feet as if nothing had happened. Marie repositioned herself immediately, ready to strike again as many times as necessary. But Will knew that brute force alone wouldn't bring it down. They needed something more decisive. As he began formulating his next move, Erica suddenly shouted a warning. Something was coming. The ogre had changed tactics. It began grabbing nearby goblins and hurling them like projectiles. Will reacted quickly, dodging as best as he could, but Erica froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Marie stepped in without hesitation. With incredible precision, she swung her sword like a bat, striking the incoming goblins and sending them flying back toward the ogre. In that brief exchange, she glanced at Will and immediately understood. He had already devised a plan. "I'll handle this," she said firmly. "Go." Trusting his teammates, Will moved. He charged straight toward the ogre, using a series of quick, controlled attacks to draw its attention. His strikes weren't meant to deal damage, they were distractions. As the ogre focused on him, Will slipped past its line of sight and maneuvered behind it. In that moment, he committed to his final move. Placing his hand against the back of the ogre's head, he cast Life Force Overload. The effect was immediate. The ogre's regenerative ability spiraled out of control. Its life force surged beyond its limits, its heart ruptured, and the unstable energy tore through its body from within. In an instant, it exploded. By forcing its regeneration into overdrive, Will had turned its greatest strength into its downfall, leaving it with no chance to recover. Now, only the remaining goblins stood between them and victory. It didn't take them long to finish off the remaining goblins. Marie was overjoyed by their victory, throwing her arms around her teammates in excitement. For a brief moment, everything felt light again, like a hard-earned win they could finally celebrate. But that moment didn't last. In the distance, they saw it, Sirius Tornado. Without hesitation, they rushed toward it. When they arrived, Sirius stood unharmed, having already taken down the surrounding goblins without a scratch. Nearby, Board had just finished dealing with another group and turned his attention toward them. His sharp gaze swept across the group before he remarked that their numbers didn't add up. "Where are your superiors?" he asked bluntly. At that moment, Urin arrived, accompanied by the two boys who had fled from Erica's team earlier. Will immediately ran to him, relief evident on his face. Urin explained that he had found the two boys around the same time Sirius unleashed his tornado, so he followed the disturbance and made his way there. He gave Will a light tap on the shoulder and said he had done well. He was glad he had entrusted the others to him. But Board wasn't satisfied yet. "There's still one missing," he pointed out. Veronica. She was nowhere to be found. Without wasting time, Urin and Board decided to split up and search. Urin agreed and suggested that anyone capable of moving alone should spread out in different directions. Board then ordered Sirius and Will to search as well. After heading deeper into the forest, Will enhanced his hearing, trying to detect any signs of life. He wasn't particularly skilled at it yet, but it was better than nothing. And soon enough, he found her. Relief washed over him when he saw that Veronica was safe. But that relief quickly turned into shock. For a brief moment he saw it. A faint red glow in her hand. The same eerie light as the red moon. She quickly hid it in her pocket and looked at him. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Will was taken aback. "What do you mean?" he replied. "I was looking for you. The monsters are going berserk. The field training is over." Veronica didn't respond immediately. She simply walked past him. "Then we should return," she said calmly. But something felt wrong, very wrong. Will couldn't ignore it. He called out to her, asking her to stop. "What was that just now?" he asked. "What did you have in your hand?" "It was nothing," she replied. Will pressed further, his voice tightening. "What do you mean, nothing? And what have you been doing this whole time? You left your students behind." His hands were trembling now. "Answer me." For a moment, Veronica said nothing. Then she turned toward him, her hand resting on her sword. "It would be better for everyone," she said quietly. If you stayed silent about this. She turned away again and began walking. I won't let anything bad happen, she added. Will stood there, unable to respond. He wanted to question her further, to demand answers, but he couldn't. Not yet. Veronica wasn't just a teacher. She was someone he had fought alongside in his past life. He wasn't ready to doubt her. So he followed her back in silence. And just like that, the field training came to an end. Even after returning to the academy, Will couldn't find peace. The thoughts refused to leave him. They kept him awake until dawn. Was Veronica influenced by the red moon? But that didn't align with what he remembered from his past life. Lost in thought, Will walked through the corridors the next morning, until he saw her again. Veronica was speaking with another professor. Instinctively, Will suppressed his presence and stayed out of sight, quietly listening in. The other professor handed her a letter and said he had approved her exit application. Then he asked where she planned to go. Veronica gave a simple answer. It's a personal matter. And with that, she walked away. Will's unease surged into something far heavier. Without hesitation, he decided to follow her. Will began to regret his decision as he followed her. It felt uncomfortably close to stalking. But he pushed that thought aside. If this could help him uncover the truth behind the coming tragedy, if there was even a chance he could clear Veronica's name, then he was willing to bear any discomfort. As he moved through the streets, a strange sense of familiarity crept over him. Even though he had been sent straight to the front lines after graduation in his previous life, he was certain he had been here once before. The feeling lingered, just out of reach, until something triggered it. Veronica stopped at a bakery. She stepped inside and bought honey bread. The sight hit Will like a memory rushing back to life. He remembered this. In his past life, she had bought that same bread for him. When he took a bite, the taste had overwhelmed him. It was so rich and sweet that he had nearly lost himself in it. He had told her he was from the countryside and had never tasted anything like it before. Veronica, on the other hand, had grown up in a merchant family. She had access to all kinds of food, from all kinds of places. But she had said it wasn't just about her upbringing. She had a rule. From a young age, she had witnessed how quickly people, circumstances, and entire lives could change. Because of that, she developed a habit. She acted on things immediately. She never put anything off for later. Then she smiled and said something that had unsettled him. She didn't know when she might die, so she chose to live fully in every moment. At the time, Will had been troubled by that way of thinking. It sounded almost pessimistic. But she clarified that she didn't want to die. Still, if something ever did happen to her, she had asked him to protect her. Back then, he had accepted that responsibility without hesitation. And when the time came, he failed. This time, he refused to repeat that mistake. No matter what the truth was, he would face it with his own eyes. Leaving the bakery, Veronica made her way toward an abandoned building. Will suppressed his presence even further and followed her inside, moving carefully through the shadows. He stopped just around a corner, keeping himself hidden while watching her. I've been waiting for you. A hooded figure stood before her. It pains me to call you to a place like this, but this is an important matter. The man pulled back his hood and extended his hand. Hand it over. Without hesitation, Veronica took out the red, glowing stone and placed it in his hand. For a moment, the man looked almost fearful as he stared at it. Then his expression shifted into something ecstatic. You didn't betray my trust, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. With this, the cult's long-cherished desire. He laughed softly. We are one step closer to the realization of the red moon. Will's heart sank. His worst suspicions had just been confirmed. And in that very moment, his presence suppression faltered. Veronica reacted instantly. She turned and swung her sword straight toward him. Will tried to stop her, calling out that it was him, but Veronica's attack wasn't meant for him. Her strike clashed against a massive water dragon that had risen between them. Holding her ground against the surging force, she spoke calmly, without even turning back. So, you followed me. The hooded stranger stepped forward, his tone laced with disappointment. I told you to come alone, he said. I thought I had finally found a worthy comrade for our order. Veronica didn't waver. As she struck the water dragon with precise, controlled movements, she replied that it had been an accident. The man's expression hardened. If that's the case, he said coldly, then dispose of the witness. Only then will you be accepted. Veronica immediately pointed her sword at him. I refuse, she said firmly. This is an investigation. I have no intention of sacrificing a precious student. Will slowly rose from where he had crouched, still trying to process everything. I want to understand what's going on, he said. Veronica let out a quiet sigh. This time, she didn't deny anything. She explained that on the day she disappeared in the forest, she had sensed something unusual and went to investigate. What she found was a berserk monster, and the red stone. The stone itself was suspicious, so she tested it by pouring her magic into it. That was when it emitted the same eerie red glow. That was also when the stranger appeared. He had greeted her as if he had found an ally, someone who could stand alongside him. When she asked who he was, he didn't answer directly. Instead, he laid out conditions. If she wanted to learn about him, and the stone, she had to follow 2 rules. First, she had to keep the stone active, to prove her capability. Second, she had to come alone to a designated location, to prove her trust. He had apologized for the test, but said he looked forward to her joining their order. Then he left. Veronica glanced at Will, clearly frustrated. She had told him she wouldn't let anything bad happen, yet he had followed her anyway. Will lowered his gaze slightly, disappointed in himself for doubting her. Still, he admitted that he couldn't fully understand the situation with so little information. Even so, now that the truth was out, he felt relieved. Veronica wasn't the enemy. The stranger, however, was far from pleased. After hearing everything, he let out a cold laugh. I'm even more disappointed in you now, he said. Without hesitation, he threw the red stone into the water. There's no choice left, he continued. I'll have to dispose of you, even if you are talented. In the next instant, the water beneath them surged violently. Multiple water dragons rose from below, far more than before. Even Will could tell, this wasn't ordinary power. Not even the supposed members of this order could produce something like this under normal conditions. There were 8 massive bodies now, writhing and roaring in unison. Will stepped forward, ready to act. I'll handle half of them, he said. But Veronica stopped him. There's no need, she replied, and charged ahead. With a single, fluid motion, she unleashed her technique. Magic Sword Gale. Her blade cut through all 8 bodies at once. For a brief moment, the battlefield fell silent. But then, the severed bodies regenerated almost instantly. Will's expression hardened. He understood immediately. This level of regeneration was far beyond anything healing magic could replicate. As one of the monster's heads lunged toward Will, he dodged it cleanly and immediately shifted position, circling toward its back to examine it more closely. Moving with precision, he plunged his dagger into the creature's body, only to find that its flesh was unnaturally soft, almost like it had no structure at all. Realization began to form. Will quickly turned to Veronica and told her to step back. He wanted to try something. She didn't object, but warned him not to act recklessly. Will, however, had already made up his mind. As he released his physical reinforcement limiter, he glanced at her and said quietly, "Let me be reckless this once." Grabbing one of the monster's heads firmly, Will pulled with all his strength and tore the entire body out of the water. What emerged wasn't a dragon at all. It was something else entirely. A soft-bodied creature, an octodraco. Veronica immediately understood. What she had thought were heads were actually its limbs. That was why it could regenerate so quickly. Even when she sliced through them, it didn't matter. They weren't vital points. The hooded man, clearly irritated now, watched Will with a mix of surprise and disappointment. You figured it out that quickly, he muttered. What our order seeks is not something meant for people like you. Since things had escalated beyond his expectations, he decided to intervene personally. This man, Arut, was no ordinary opponent. He was a cultist, and clearly far more dangerous than he had initially appeared. Will turned briefly to Veronica. Take care of the monster, he said. Your sword will be more effective against it than my magic. She hesitated. Exposing him to danger like this didn't sit well with her. But Will stepped closer, gently taking her hand. As he cast physical reinforcement magic on her, he looked her in the eye and said, I'll be back soon. Veronica smiled faintly at his boldness, but warned him about something that still concerned her. After listening carefully, Will nodded. I understand, he said. And then, he charged. Arut reacted instantly, preparing his defense as he saw Will's speed. When Will's attack connected, he was surprised. It had actually been blocked. But Arut wasn't untouched. A thin cut appeared on his face. And then it healed. Will's eyes narrowed. So Veronica had been right. Arut was the same as him. A battle healer. Will asked him directly if he had developed that fighting style himself. Arut laughed. No, he said proudly. I could never come up with something like that on my own. But with the teachings of the Order, even someone like me can achieve this much. That answer shook Will. So this kind of combat, this fusion of healing and battle, already existed in his previous timeline. Arut, meanwhile, studied Will closely. From the way he fought, it was clear Will had a natural aptitude for this path. I want you to meet someone, Arut said. Would you consider joining our order? Will didn't hesitate. Not for a second. I'd never become your ally, he said coldly. Not in this life, or the next. Arut's expression hardened. Then I have no choice. He prepared to kill him. As Will endured Arut's relentless blows, his mind raced through everything he still didn't understand. The red stone, the mysterious order, the connection between healing and offensive magic. There were too many unanswered questions. But now, for the first time, he saw a path forward. If he could defeat the man standing before him, he might be able to uncover the truth, and perhaps even prevent the catastrophic future that loomed over the world. Arut, meanwhile, had begun to realize that Will was far from an easy opponent. His usual attacks weren't enough, and for the first time, the possibility of losing crossed his mind. So he decided to reveal something more. Physical corruption. As he activated the ability granted by the Order, the right side of his body transformed grotesquely. His form twisted, power surging unnaturally through him. Arut began to speak, almost proudly, as if he were sharing a revelation. He said that before discovering the Order, he had lived a meaningless life, working under arrogant superiors, enduring humiliation, and seeing the worst of humanity. As a healer, he had come to realize that this world was filled with people who weren't even worth saving. To someone like him, the Order had offered more than power. It had given him purpose, awareness, and a reason to exist. From that moment on, he claimed, his life had finally begun to shine. Will wasn't interested in any of it. That's where you're wrong, he said flatly. He charged forward again, his voice steady but filled with conviction. If I leave you alone, countless people will die. Arut didn't hesitate. I'm fine with that, he replied. The Order says it's acceptable. With a single devastating strike, Arut sent Will flying across the room. His body slammed into the far wall, the impact forcing blood from his lungs. For a moment, everything went still. But Will refused to stay down. Because of people like this. Everything he had lost would happen again. Everyone he cared about would die. Even if it cost him his life, he wouldn't allow that future to repeat. Slowly, painfully, he stood up again. His body screamed in protest, but he forced his healing magic to activate, restoring himself just enough to keep fighting. Even Arut couldn't hide his surprise at the sheer level of Will's regeneration. Will wiped the blood from his mouth and looked straight at him. I'm not forgiving you, he said. I'll make sure you feel something far worse than death. This time, Arut attacked with full intent to kill, no hesitation, no restraint. But Will met him head-on. Their fists collided. Will didn't flinch. That's all? He said. Don't start complaining. I haven't even begun to hit you yet. Before Arut could react, the next strike came. It was faster than he could track. The punch landed cleanly on his chin. Everything went dark. Arut collapsed instantly, unconscious. Will stood over him, breathing heavily. We're not done, he muttered quietly. We'll continue this later. He immediately turned to look for Veronica. She was finishing her own battle. With a decisive movement, she unleashed her technique, magic sword flash, and delivered the final blow. Once the monster was dealt with, the two of them regrouped. Then, without wasting any time, they dragged Arut back and woke him up. It was time for answers. Will pinned Arut against the wall, pressing a dagger against his throat. His expression was steady, but his voice carried the weight of everything he had been holding back. He told him there were countless things he needed answers to. The Order, what is it? And what are you trying to achieve? Arut, however, remained resolute. He said that believers of the Order would never reveal its secrets to outsiders. Then, without warning, he grabbed Will's hand, the one holding the dagger, and drove the blade into his own throat. Even in his final moments, Arut felt no fear. There was only satisfaction. He believed he had fulfilled his duty, that he had protected the Order's secrets. He was certain that his sacrifice would guide his soul to the world their Lord Claudio's envisioned. He waited for that world to reveal itself. But instead, something felt wrong. His consciousness remained clear. Too clear. When he opened his eyes, Will was standing right in front of him. Shock overtook him instantly. He reached for his neck. The wound was gone. Completely healed. The cold sensation of the blade, the feeling of blood spilling from his throat, it had all been real. He had died, or at least, he had come incredibly close. Will watched him calmly. "I was surprised you'd go that far," he admitted. "But you didn't die instantly. So I healed you." Arut argued that it was impossible. He had practically died on the spot. But Will simply shook his head. "Almost isn't instant," he replied. "That's enough for me." Arut realized something then. This wasn't ordinary healing magic. Will didn't deny it. "I'm not ordinary," he said plainly. "I'm going to become the best healer in the world." Then he added, almost casually, "If I can bring you back from that, I can keep doing it, as many times as I want." He smiled. A quiet, unsettling smile. "Now, are you ready to talk?" For the first time, Arut understood the situation he was in. He had no way out. No escape. But before he could say anything, something changed. A strange sensation overtook his body. Water began to seep from his eyes, his nose, his mouth, his skin itself. Veronica immediately sensed something was wrong. "Get away from him!" she shouted. In the next instant, high-pressure steam burst from Arut's entire body. His form collapsed, drying out completely, like something hollowed from the inside. Will reacted immediately, attempting to heal him. But it was useless. His life force had already been extinguished. "This wasn't natural," Will muttered. Arut had been under some kind of curse. And not a simple one. Something powerful enough to ensure silence, no matter what. Will lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This happened because I followed you." Veronica shook her head gently and gave him a faint smile. "What matters is that you're safe," she replied. With nothing more to be done, the two of them left and returned to Schwartz. On the way back, Will expressed his frustration. Despite everything that had happened, they hadn't managed to learn anything concrete about the Order. But Veronica saw it differently. "Knowing that people like them exist is already something valuable," she said. "You can't prepare for something you don't even know about." Will thought about it, and agreed. Even if they didn't have all the answers, they were already ahead compared to his past life. Veronica admitted that she was glad she had participated in the field training. If she hadn't, they would never have uncovered any of this. She also confessed that part of the reason she forced herself into it was because she had been worried about him. Will paused, then brought up something that had been on his mind for a while. He asked if she could use static mana. Veronica thought for a moment before answering. She said she had grown up in a merchant family and had encountered many kinds of magic users, both healers and offensive mages. Perhaps that exposure had influenced her abilities. But Will wasn't convinced. To him, her understanding of magic felt far more advanced than that. Veronica admitted she didn't know for sure. However, she vaguely remembered someone discussing such concepts with her when she was younger. That detail caught Will's attention immediately. Could that person be connected to the Order? Or even to the catastrophe he was trying to prevent? Before he could press further, Veronica interrupted the conversation. "Let's take a break from serious talk," she said lightly. "Come on, we should get some bread from the market." And just like that, the conversation ended, leaving behind more questions than answers. Still, Will had gained something important. A clue. Something that might help him change the future. Though that didn't stop him from getting scolded later for leaving without permission. Elsewhere, far from Schwartz, two figures stood in quiet discussion, a mysterious girl and a man. They spoke of Arut's death. Without hesitation, his responsibility, and the red stone, was passed on to the girl. She accepted it eagerly. Ready to carry the mission forward. If you like this recap, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more awesome manhwa stories.